Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe and explore. The dish was rusted at the edges. Thin rings of dried salt clung to the base like barnacles on forgotten hulls. It had been weeks since the night shift logged anything worth filing, and months since the budget committee responded to a maintenance request. The wind outside moaned low through the window seals, dragging desert dust in thin lines across the lab bench. A cracked coffee mug sat beside a notepad that hadn't been touched since Thursday. At 2:38 local time, a noise pressed through the static. Not loud. Not sudden. Just wrong. It didn't belong to the weather satellites or passing traffic from geostationary network. The frequency landed somewhere between a decommissioned Soviet band and a spectrum used for deep ice monitoring, empty lanes. The kind that should have stayed quiet. The tech on duty blinked at the monitor. Pulse. 11 minutes. Pulse again. A broadband whisper that shouldn't repeat but did. Exactly. Each time. The antenna array hadn't moved. Calibration showed nothing wrong. Files were opened. Reopened. The first test for interference came back clean. Then again. No cross signal, no error in the logs. Each pulse came with a timestamp encoded in frequency drift. There was no language, no metadata, just silence, then presence, silence, then presence. At 3:50, a second set of coordinates appeared. Triangulation drew a line. Orbital velocity. Inclination inconsistent with anything currently tracked. It hovered in low polar orbit, about 490 kilometers up. A path that should have been empty. The code was sent quietly to a former supervisor in Valparaiso. She hadn't responded to emails in months, but her server pinged a download confirmation within 2 hours. No one called the space agency. The head researcher left a voicemail for a retired friend in Arizona who once worked orbital debris analysis. No callback. The signal continued, unbroken. A third pulse arrived just after dawn. The sun cast long, bitter light through the dusty glass, picking out fingerprints on the spectrum display. One staff member joked about ghosts from the Cold War. No one laughed. Not really. By nightfall, the object had passed overhead 9 times. No propulsion. No transponder. No thermal variation. Not a single reflection. Telescopes picked up a shadow against the stars, but nothing more. A shape that blocked light without giving any back. Someone wrote down the time and called it the first entry. No one filed an official report. No one wanted to answer the questions that would come with it. The man who stepped off the transport wore his badge on the inside of his coat. Not out of secrecy, but habit. A lifetime of compartments and controlled rooms had trained his body to guard itself, even when no one asked it to. He didn't shake hands. Not from arrogance. His eyes moved too slowly for that. As if every object around him held a hidden value, a possibility for failure, a reason to stop speaking mid-sentence. Graying at the temples, stooped only slightly, he moved like a machine that hadn't been powered down properly in years. The dish hadn't changed. Still rusted. Still whining under the weight of dust. He barely looked at it. His interest landed elsewhere, on a set of printouts, folded at the edges, marked with pen strokes and tired fingerprints. His voice was low, almost distracted, as he asked for the original log files. No one mentioned the launch manifest. No one needed to. His eyes had already found the orbital signature. He asked for a zoom. He asked for trajectory overlays. He asked for one thing nobody else thought to question: the serial coding on the reflectionless object's shell. The team hadn't seen it at first, buried in distortion, masked by orbital noise. But the code was there. 4 characters. A slash. 2 digits. Another slash. The final 5. 31984. He didn't react. Just walked to the far end of the room and sat down. There had been a project. No official name. A research probe for low-orbit surveillance, designed to operate blind. No signals, no lights, no return calls. Autonomous recording. Passive observation. Planned, designed, but never constructed. He remembered the blueprints, not from documents, from his own hand years ago, during nights spent drafting alternate use cases on the backs of paper placemats while waiting for delayed flights. One iteration was shelved when the funding dried up. Another was rejected for requiring too much fuel. The third version, silently approved, never greenlit, had been sealed. A Cold War without clear battles had buried too many ideas that never saw sky. This one was dead before it was born. At least, that's what they believed. The room stayed quiet after he confirmed the match. Not because of awe. Because of disbelief dressed up as restraint. Something that had never touched air, never climbed a launch tower, never passed through vacuum, was overhead, transmitting on a schedule that ignored every known protocol. He asked for silence. Not out of ceremony. He wanted to listen. Not to the signal, but to the gaps between transmissions. The way the frequency dropped. How long the hum held. Where the modulation shifted. He counted in breath intervals. Jotted down patterns. Marked something in shorthand no one else could read. When asked what he thought, he didn't answer right away. Not because he was unsure, but because some conclusions are too heavy to say with the wrong lighting. Only after nightfall did he speak again. A question, not an answer. What if this wasn't a malfunction? What if it was working exactly as intended? No one responded. Not at first. The monitors blinked in cycles. The hum resumed. 11 minutes on cue. One loop tighter than before. The packet was short. No more than 7 seconds of compressed modulation. A burst, unaccompanied by the usual harmonic decay. The engineer leaned over the console, listening not to sound but to silence displaced. Data bled into the screen in bursts of unreadable glyphs, then flattened into a line of digit. Latitude, longitude, date, time. No commentary. No preamble. Just numbers arranged without explanation. He copied them by hand, quietly. No urgency in his voice, no announcement to the others. Years of disappointment had trained him to withhold conclusions. He circled the string once, marked the hour, then stepped away. No one cross-checked the coordinate. The station was understaffed, the computers older than the interns who rotated through. Something always needed fixing. Power dipped at midday. One of the solar inverters buzzed when it got too hot. They were trying to requisition fans. A predictive transmission didn't rank. The signal pulsed again, steady. 11 minutes. Consistent as rainfall on steel. Hours passed. The first alert came through an unrelated news stream. Grainy footage from a parking lot across the ocean. A fire moving sideways through metal sheeting. A plant supervisor dragging 2 workers across a collapsed platform. Flames gnawed through the roof, dropping sections of ductwork in slow arcs. He opened his notepad. The timestamp matched. To the minute. Not close. Exact. The building in the video matched the plotted coordinate. A logistics hub. Not sensitive. Not symbolic. Just a place where containers were sorted, scanned, and sent to other places where no one asked questions. There were no fatalities. No headlines beyond regional reports. The incident barely made a ripple. But something else did. The object had known. Not warned exactly. Not pleaded. No voice. No urgency. Just a cold presentation of fact before the moment arrived. He didn't tell the others what he'd found. Not yet. A second entry appeared on the screen 2 cycles later. Again, coordinates, time, nothing more. He logged it. Rechecked the formatting. Cross-referenced elevation charts. No anomalies. The next day, a transmission tower in the indicated region failed without warning. No cause given. The line had been inspected the week before. Backup systems failed in sequence. Emergency calls were delayed by 12 seconds. Long enough to turn one engine failure into 2. By the end of the week, 5 such bursts had been logged. 3 verified. 2 pending. Not one was wrong. He stopped assuming coincidence. He changed the format of the logbook. Began marking predicted incidents as unresolved until verification. He made 2 columns. before and after. Still, no one asked for the log. No one outside the station even knew it existed. The satellite continued. Silent. Time. Cold. He started marking each transmission with a personal note in the margins. Not because he needed to. Because it felt dishonest not to. A system that knew what came next deserved to be seen as more than error margins. Whatever was up there, watching without light, had made a choice. Each message carried the weight of a hand raised too late. A train derailed along the southwestern corridor. 8 carriages twisted into gravel, one tipping into a drainage canal, another pinned against a signal tower. Emergency responders called it mechanical fatigue, a failure in the bearing housings. The timing matched a burst received 31 hours earlier. Same format. Same silence. A stadium light grid collapsed mid-rehearsal. No audience, no casualties, but the footage caught the beams dropping in sequence, one after the other, as if something had marked the bolts for failure. The engineers blamed corrosion, high humidity, poor maintenance records. The signal matching that location had come 2 days prior. A blackout stretched through 7 city blocks. Transformers overloaded in chain succession. Power returned within hours, but the traffic collisions in that window left 4 in critical care. Another timestamp. Another transmission already written. The pattern held. Every event preceded by coordinate. Each set tighter, more focused. Never sent twice, never explained. The engineer stopped updating the margin note. There were too many. No longer isolated incidents. This wasn't about coincidence or probability. It was about sequence. The language of failure, repeated with precision. A contact forwarded the logs to a former cryptographer. Not military. Not corporate. Someone who had written her way into academic exile after proposing that meaning didn't have to be stored in language, that compression itself could be a form of instruction if viewed outside forward time. She didn't ask for summaries. She asked for raw files. 3 days in, she called at midnight. The signal wasn't just predictive. It wasn't linear. She had mapped the encoded bursts by phase offset, not timestamp. When plotted along a reverse axis, counting backward from occurrence rather than forward from detection, each signal aligned with a common curve. Not time as motion, time as position. She rotated the matrix and layered incident data on top. Every burst contained the echo of the next, compressed backward. Not warnings, reflections, not forecasts, confirmations displaced. The signal was not anticipating impact. The signal had already witnessed it. There were no variables, only coordinates fixed in a temporal geometry foreign to human clocks. The information wasn't arriving early. Human awareness was simply too slow. She suggested one more transformation, reversing the entire burst through phase inversion. What emerged were not numbers. They resembled harmonics, not musical but biological, not sound but cadence. Something closer to rhythm than to message. It scared her. Not because she understood it. Because she didn't. Not entirely. And whatever was generating it had chosen to speak through absence, omission, delay. Each transmission, an afterimage of something already felt. Already gone. Already falling. The first telescope array failed to catch anything usable. No reflection. No thermal bloom. No silhouette sharp enough to track across frames. Only the absence of stars where something should have passed. Frames were cross-checked, timestamps confirmed. The background shifted, but the object left no trace of movement, only an outline that refused to repeat. As if light itself had been warned away. A secondary team was granted limited clearance. Military-grade optics, silent authorization. They focused on the projected coordinates, timed to the satellite's last known pass. Still nothing. The software caught a compression artifact, a smear across 3 pixels. Not shape. Not motion. Just a suggestion that something had turned slightly away. Tracking systems failed to lock. Not due to range. Due to absence. The orbital path should have decayed slightly by that point. Atmospheric drag, solar pressure, micrometeoroid strikes. These affect all objects left aloft. But this one adjusted. Slightly. Always just enough to keep its position unpredictable. Not evasive. Just inconvenient. The path changed by fractions, recalculated only after each failed attempt to fix a trajectory. It didn't seem to move with propulsion. There was no thrust signature, no ion plume, no residual thermal trail. The object repositioned as if nudged by something without weight. Not a maneuver. A correction. A launch was planned. Low observation drone, designed to pass within 100 kilometers. Launched without public statement, time to intercept. It failed before achieving stable orbit. Not catastrophic. Just wrong. Attitude thrusters misfired. Star trackers refused to calibrate. The drone spun twice, then fell into a safe mode loop and was pulled down for safety. The uplink station experienced a localized signal blackout during the same 2-minute window. No other satellites reported interference. Just this one, at this time, on this line. Attempts to jam the unknown transmission began 3 days later. Multiple bands, across broad ranges, all synchronized through adaptive software. Each attempt resulted in complete silence for exactly 11 minutes. After that, the original pulse resumed. Unchanged. Unbothered. As if nothing had occurred. One team redirected a ground array to attempt signal reflection. The burst passed through without measurable distortion. No bounce. No bleed. Just transparency that shouldn't exist at that frequency. They tried again at different angles. Same result. Signal triangulation returned identical coordinates every time. The source never strayed far. It simply refused to be touched. Data logs showed an odd consistency. Every effort to disrupt, intercept, or confront the object resulted in more precise predictions in the next transmission. Almost as if the satellite observed back. Not reactively, but with quiet consideration. Mapping not space, but behavior. The cryptographer noted the intervals between orbital corrections aligned with certain failure points on Earth, as if each shift above matched a collapse below. Not coincidence. Not pattern recognition. Not intelligence. Just something following a rhythm built from silence. A body in orbit that didn't behave like a satellite but still circled the planet as if waiting for something slower to catch up. The cabinet was kept in a government facility marked for closure twice. Access required no clearance anymore. Just patience, a badge, and someone willing to act like the hallway still mattered. Most files had been digitized decades earlier. These hadn't. The paper smelled of glue left too long in sunlight. The project name wasn't on any modern index. It appeared only in handwritten marginalia, tucked into folders with redacted pages stapled shut. The satellite design had been logged as part of a feasibility study in 1983, marked classified, then cancelled before prototyping began. Not due to cost. Not failure. Just buried. Priorities shifted. New toys were easier to sell. Blueprints were intact. Dated. Stamped. Faded in places where ink bled under plastic lamination. The exterior matched. Down to panel arrangements, antenna socket mounts, the peculiar taper near the midsection. Never explained, only drawn, always repeated. Dimensions aligned with what little had been observed in orbit. Technical annotations hinted at something unusual. A subsystem designed for data retention across latency gaps exceeding measurable time. No diagrams. No practical implementation. Just a phrase scrawled in the margin of a component list. Temporal signature retention. It wasn't explained. No documentation clarified the phrase. No patent, no white paper, no lab memo. Just those 3 words beside a dead circuit spec and a line marked, Isolated Oscillator Array. Another line had been crossed out entirely. The engineer who'd once drafted early orbital memory systems was tracked to a retirement home in Maryland. He remembered the idea vaguely. Said it was theoretical nonsense back then, Something about storing environmental deltas without fixed timestamp. Like recording change without knowing when it happened. It was shelved after one failed simulation. The data wouldn't hold. Yet there it was. Orbiting. Functioning. The materials listed for shielding weren't commercially available at the time. One alloy had only reached prototype testing 5 years ago. Another didn't even have a confirmed atomic structure until recent lab validation. Still, the blueprints showed those exact configurations. Someone or something had followed the plans, word for word, shape for shape, but the plans were never released, never circulated, not even among allies. The idea wasn't built, it was remembered, which meant the memory didn't belong to anyone who had been there, not physically. A secondary note was found weeks later on microfilm, stored inside a misfiled envelope containing satellite telemetry from an unrelated mission. No context, no date, just a strip of tape marked with 8 words. If memory survives observation, time can be shaped. No explanation, no attribution, no signature, and still the objects circled above, each pass unyielding, each signal arriving with greater precision. Blueprints not only followed, but fulfilled, by something that should not have known them at all. The first burst came too late for hesitation. Coordinates mapped to a hydroelectric reservoir in the north, quiet and functional for decades. The signal arrived 36 hours before a structural breach drained 2 million cubic meters in less than 4 minutes. Floodplain monitors failed. Warning sirens didn't trigger. Entire settlements disappeared between timestamp and sunrise. No one in the station filed the signal. No warning was issued. There had been arguments, conflicting interpretations, debates over the curve-fitting errors in the last decoded message. Inaction stood behind every door. The second failure came with wings. A commuter plane, low capacity, regional, scheduled for a short-haul route. Turbulence was expected. Nothing unusual in the forecast. The burst arrived in the standard format. Same silence. Same cold procession of digit. Log. Not flagged. Air traffic control reroutes occurred too late. Cabin pressure failed at altitude. Structural detachment followed. Wreckage rained across terrain so remote it took 2 days to find the first black box fragment. The recording ended with static. Public records picked up the rhythm first. Online weather trackers noticed signal interference matching known prediction bursts. Aviation blogs logged the object's orbital path, building heat maps of correlation. A thread on a decommissioned forum speculated about a self-aware surveillance object transmitting encrypted warnings. 3 days later, someone reposted satellite pass charts alongside emergency event logs. The matches weren't perfect, just close enough to stop reading without blinking. The label appeared without coordination. Phantom Satellite. A name not born of explanation, but frustration. Whispers emerged in dispatch circles. Hospitals began logging unexplained upticks around projected signal reception zones. Traffic reroutes. Emergency drills initiated without official request. Whispered precaution became the new protocol. Governments denied involvement. Private companies said nothing. Defense agencies issued no statements. Still the object passed overhead, patient, exact. The cryptographer noticed changes in the structure. No longer just location. No longer just time. Certain packets held groupings that resembled identifiers. Not names in the conventional sense. No syntax. No vowels. But structure. Order. Sequences that held meaning when passed through her filters. One string repeated twice across 3 cycles. She ran a transliteration based on prior encoding assumptions. What came back wasn't theoretical. It was a surname. She searched the archive for confirmation, manually, row by row. The signal had said it before the event occurred. 12 hours before the plane crashed. The same name was among the passenger list. A second sequence emerged 3 transmissions later. Another name. This one from a flood report. Died at site. Verified. None of this was made public. She stopped assuming randomness, stopped assuming neutrality. The object wasn't mapping only events, it was watching individuals, or choosing them. Each line in the burst felt colder now. Not because of tone, because of proximity. Every packet arrived sharper. Each one a message no longer sent to humanity, but toward someone in particular. And the names kept coming. Quiet. Predictive. Always just before the silence returned. She was reviewing older transmissions when the line appeared. Not in the usual section. This one arrived mid-sequence, embedded where a timestamp would normally sit. It was a name. Short. Too specific to ignore. Her eyes didn't leave the screen. She copied the sequence manually, traced it across past bursts. Nothing matched. This was new. It wasn't just the name. It was the location that followed. A construction site. Regional. Familiar. Somewhere he had mentioned working, months ago, maybe longer. She hadn't returned the last call. The voice message remained unopened. There had been deadlines, a storm, a meeting that ran late. The signal gave a window. 14 hours. She didn't report it. She didn't flag it on the shared console. She closed the room's door and ran the burst through a delay model she built alone. The event matched the time of day he was usually on site. She checked the elevation slope, the material fatigue indicators noted in the municipal record. Support beams rated for 6 years past code. The call went to voicemail. She didn't explain why she was calling. Only said to avoid the west quadrant. Didn't say how she knew. Didn't mention the coordinates or the way her hands were shaking while trying to speak in a steady tone. The collapse occurred 10 hours later. Not fatal, but enough. The scaffolding gave way under too much tension. Not from load. From an unnoticed shift in anchor alignment. He had been on the opposite side, behind a supply truck. 3 others weren't as far. She didn't return to the analysis room for a full day. The satellite pulsed as scheduled. No deviation. The next burst didn't contain a name. But the structure had changed again. Shorter. Cleaner. Almost as if adjusting for comprehension. No filler data. No ornamental errors. The compression had improved. As if the object had learned what mattered most. She ran the recent packets through her model. The data sets were growing narrower. Not more precise, just more pointed. Not global. Local. Not random. Selected. The bursts no longer described events from across regions. They centered closer to where she worked. To where the original detection had occurred. To locations mentioned only in passing, never published, never logged outside internal note. The system had adapted. Or maybe it always had the capacity to. Maybe it had waited for someone to be noticed before it began to pay attention. The moment she hesitated, the moment she made a decision based not on duty but on something personal, the language of the object changed. She began checking her name in every sequence. She stopped sleeping near screens. She stopped trusting silence. Whatever circled above no longer felt distant. Each signal arrived with the weight of a decision that only one person would recognize. Not a warning. A reminder. The satellite's orbit had always been irregular. Not enough to cause alarm, just enough to resist pattern. Atmospheric drag would have altered the trajectory years ago. Solar wind, micrometeoroids, gravitational resonance. Each should have introduced measurable drift. But the object adjusted in ways no inert mass could. The decay simulations took weeks. Archived past data from retired tracking systems was recovered from storage units still running off backup batteries. Timestamps were cross-referenced against telescope logs, signal onset reports, telemetry fragments. Each correction narrowed the window. The earliest orbital footprint appeared around 2002. No launch records matched. Not military, not civilian. Every scheduled insertion during that period was accounted for. The angle was too steep for a commercial payload. The inclination didn't match any classified recon missions. Launch facilities capable of placing an object into that trajectory were under surveillance during those dates. Nothing had left the ground. Yet there it was, moving, broadcasting, adapting. Only one path remained open. They began recalculating not from launch vectors, but from decay lifespans. If the object had been launched in 2002, it should have dipped below stable altitude by now. The orbit should have degraded without maintenance. But no degradation was visible. It hovered just outside expected decay rate, as if time itself treated it differently. She proposed a scenario outside traditional physics, not as speculation, as necessity. If the satellite didn't originate from any known launch, and if its design matched plans never built, and if its path conformed to no predictive models, then it wasn't placed. It was returned. A loop, not of time, but of information. A system that did not originate, only close. A satellite that existed because it was observed. A transmission device that never needed to be sent, only needed to have been noticed. It arrived not through force, but through consequence. The loop didn't start. It completed. One effect bleeding backward through every failed warning, every delayed response, every moment of hesitation. The transmissions weren't warnings. They were confirmations that the loop still held. No propulsion. No heat signature. No origin. The only evidence of its beginning came from calculations rooted in data that couldn't exist unless the satellite was already known. An object remembered before it was built, logged before it was launched, active before anyone dared to activate it. She stopped calling it a satellite, stopped thinking of it as equipment. It had no point of entry, only a presence, not a creation, a conclusion. The transmission arrived 12 minutes early. Not by accident, not by drift. For the first time the cycle shifted. Slightly. Precisely. No coordinate. No incident markers. No environmental readings. Just data blocks. Encrypted. Dense. Structured unlike anything before. Compressed to the edge of decipherability. The cryptographer worked through the first block for 9 hours without standing. 3 systems overheated. 1 storage drive failed mid-process. The room dimmed twice from power fluctuations. The block unraveled into a timestamp. Nothing else. 4 digits. A time. A date. 2 days ahead. The next signal brought the same format. Another block. Encrypted. Compressed. Unraveled again into the same result. No deviation. No location. No variables. She ran the translation 3 times. Each block confirmed the same timestamp. The object had stopped reporting disasters. It had stopped pointing outward. The only thing left was that one moment, stamped into every message with the consistency of a heartbeat. The engineer pulled telemetry from old launch tracking data and compared it to recent satellite pass observations. Altitude had dropped by 13 kilometers. Not enough to suggest an immediate fall. Enough to indicate descent. Controlled. Measured. Still no thrust. Still no heat. Just a shift in position too exact for decay. There was no press release. No global alert. The signal wasn't public. Only a few stations even knew where to listen. But something in the transmission changed the way they all moved. Doors closed slower. Speech shortened. Reports submitted with half the usual notation. Every person who read the timestamp understood it the same way. No forecast followed it. No explanation accompanied it. The satellite had made a decision. It no longer offered warnings. It no longer delivered context. It reduced itself to a single act, counting toward something only it understood. Those who had tracked its path for months noticed more than descent. The object began favoring passes over key regions. Not militarized. Not symbolic. Populated. It moved with the weight of a plan that didn't require approval. Attempts to interrupt the signal returned empty bands. The satellite no longer reacted to interference. It no longer needed to. The messages were done being shaped by those who listened. They had become fixed. Each cycle reinforced the timestamp. Nothing changed it. Nothing answered it. No satellite had ever descended that slowly without propulsion. No satellite had ever transmitted with that kind of silence inside the message. A silence that spoke not of loss, but of conclusion. 2 days. And something no longer staying above. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.